So that's possibility and necessity. Now let me switch topics slightly and introduce another piece of jargon, namely propositions. So we believe and know and assert, that is, tell people, various things. And sometimes one and the same thing can be both believed and known and told or asserted. So I just told you a few minutes ago that Dylan came to class today by bike. So I asserted something that I also believed and that I also knew. So what is this thing that I asserted and believed and knew? Well, it's that Dylan came to class today by bike. That's the thing that I knew, that I believed, and that I told you. Now, this thing, picked out by this complement clause in English with a complementizer that and then a sentence, that followed by Dylan came to class today by bike, is perhaps a somewhat peculiar thing, and at any rate it's nothing like a bicycle. Perhaps in some sense it's a sort of abstract thing, an abstract object. But in any event, at least to superficial appearances, it's a perfectly kosher thing, and it's that kind of thing that philosophers call propositions. Propositions are the things that we believe, know, and assert. You can also take various other attitudes towards propositions, but those will do for the purposes of exposition. So here are some other propositions. That snow is white, that's something that everyone believes and knows. That Cambridge is a city. And that the earth is flat. That's a perfectly good proposition. It's something that was believed in antiquity by some people. So propositions, as that last example shows, can be true or false. The proposition that the earth is round is true. The proposition that the earth is flat is false. The proposition that Dylan came to class today by bike is true. The proposition that he came to class today by bus is false. You can think of propositions as pieces of information in the just ordinary sense of information, not in some technical sense as in information theory, but just in the perfectly ordinary sense of information, like, well, here's, an interesting tidbit of information. Dylan came to class today by bike, or, okay, that's not very interesting, but Dylan went on some long holiday to India and Nepal last year. That's a slightly more interesting piece of information. At least it's information when the proposition in question is true. If it's false, then strictly speaking, one should speak of misinformation rather than information. Okay, so those are propositions. Now, sentences have some intimate relation with propositions, but the sentences should not be confused with the propositions themselves. So what a German speaker is asserting when she says Schnee ist weiß is exactly the same as what the English speaker who says snow is white is asserting when she utters the sentence snow is white. A native German speaker and a native English speaker both believe the same thing, namely that snow is white. So you shouldn't confuse the proposition that snow is white, which has got no particular affinity to English at all, with the English sentence, snow is white. The English sentence and the German sentence can both be used to assert the very same proposition. In the jargon, we say that the two sentences express the very same proposition, namely the proposition that snow is white. Okay, so when I was explaining what an argument was, and I said, well, it's an argument. An argument is a list of sentences. And then in parentheses after that was statements. That was a way of saying that, well, in fact, there's another way of saying what an argument is other than a list of sentences. You can also think of it as a list of propositions. And since propositions and sentences should not be confused, these are two quite different ways of saying what an argument is. And for some purposes, it's better to think of an argument as a list of sentences. For some purposes, it's better to think of an argument as a list of propositions.